Picture this, a roaring engine, dust swirling under a blazing sun, and a hulking machine rolling across an American field. Yet it's not your granddad's regular old combine. Today we're going to look at 10 truly bizarre American harvesters from the 1900s that you won't believe ever roamed the countryside. These machines broke new ground with wild concepts, unusual designs, and just downright head-scratching innovations. Ready to take a trip back in time? Let's roll into the countdown. Number 10, the Rust Cotton Picker. If you ever heard old-timers talk about the promise of a mechanical cotton picker, chances are the name Rust came up at some point. In the 20s and 30s, brothers John and Mac Rust of Mississippi labored tirelessly on a machine that could do what had stumped so many before: pick cotton cleanly without mangling the fibers or hauling in half the plant. By 1936, they refined a groundbreaking prototype that introduced barbed, moistened spindles to snatch cotton lint from the field with surprising efficiency for its era. But what made the Rust Cotton Picker so bizarre wasn't the novelty of a fully mechanical picking process, though believe me, that alone was something to see. It was the contraption's method: rotating drums bristling with tiny spindles, all dampened by a specialized system. Instead of manually pulling raw cotton by hand in sweltering heat, this machine swiped the open bowls, then used doffers, little doffing bars, to strip cotton off the spindles. While it might sound straightforward today, back then, it would have looked like something from the future. Historically, the Rust brothers' invention predated many later commercial cotton pickers. Though they often struggled to secure funding and faced skepticism from the established agricultural giants, their patents laid key groundwork for what became standard spindle picking mechanisms. In the end, large manufacturers would refine and mass-produce cotton pickers, but the Rust name stands out as an early pioneer. Truth be told, these rattling spindles represented a bold step toward modernizing one of the most labor-intensive crops in America. Their biggest impact? Well, proving that mechanical cotton picking could actually be done, setting the stage for an industry-wide transformation that changed life on southern farms forever. Number 9, the Gleaner Baldwin Model A. Now, at first glance, it may not seem as flashy or off the wall as some contraptions that come up later, but in 1923, the Gleaner Baldwin Model A was quite the head-turner on its own right. Devised by the Baldwin brothers, Curtis, Edwin, and Ernest, in Nickerson, Kansas, this pull-type combine stood out for its pioneering auger-fed design. Prior machines often used draper canvases to cut crops into the threshing cylinder, which worked but could be finicky and prone to jams. The Baldwins had a wild idea of employing an auger to simplify and speed up the feeding process. Now, why was this auger concept so strange at the time? Well, decades ago, farm folks were used to belt and pulley rigs, moving crop materials across thin conveyor sheets. The cylindrical auger, a giant spiral tube, looked more like something you'd see drilling into the earth rather than gently whisking wheat or oats into a thresher. But it worked. By smoothly funneling grain heads inward, it delivered a more efficient threshing operation and paved the way for what would become a near universal standard in modern combines. Culturally, the Gleaner Baldwin Model A symbolized progress on the Great Plains. Farmers who had watched their parents and grandparents pitch hay with forks could now see a day where self-contained machines, albeit still pulled by a tractor, handle multiple steps of the harvest. It was bizarre enough to make skeptics roll their eyes, but the results spoke for themselves. With its relatively compact frame and novel feeding system, the Model A helped small-scale operations transition into more mechanized methods without going broke buying enormous rigs. You could say that the Baldwins took a crazy gamble on this new approach, but that gamble, it paid off. Their design influenced subsequent harvesters, and Gleaner would become a storied name in American agriculture. Hope you found it as intriguing as the folks who first laid eyes on that spiral auger nearly a century ago. Number 8, the Blackwelder Tomato Harvester. Now, if you think harvesting tomatoes is about plucking a juicy fruit off a vine, brace yourself for this mechanical spectacle that Blackwelder manufacturing unleashed in the 60s. Developed in collaboration with researchers at the University of California, Davis, the Blackwelder tomato harvester turned heads with its peculiar method of shaking, sorting, and separating ripe tomatoes at a speed that defied the old hand-picking method. It had giant arms and conveyor belts that literally yanked entire tomato plants out of the ground, or stripped the fruits off the vines, and then used a vibrating system to dislodge tomatoes onto moving belts. But what made it especially bizarre? Built-in electronic color sorters. Yeah, you heard that right. Back in an era when many folks were still excited just to have a color TV, this machine integrated color sensing technology to detect whether tomatoes were red and which were still green. The red ones would get whisked in one direction, while the rejects, they got tossed elsewhere. Coupled with rotating bars and fans that blew away leaves and dirt, it might as well have been a contraption from a sci-fi flick beaming down on the dusty California fields. Culturally, the Blackwelder brought about a profound shift in tomato farming, particularly in places like the Central Valley, where labor shortages pushed growers toward mechanization. Remember, the idea of an automated system discerning ripe tomatoes from immature ones was practically heresy before this. Yet the success of the harvester validated the breeding of machine-friendly tomato varieties, firmer fruit with thicker skins that can handle the jostling. This changed not just harvest methods, but the tomatoes themselves. Before long, tomato fields were abuzz with these big clanking mechanical pickers. Some observers deemed it too radical, worrying that they might replace workers or harm delicate produce. But that being said, once you saw Blackwelder in action, it was hard to argue with the efficiency. This was a piece of American ingenuity that forever altered the way that we grow and gather one of our favorite salad ingredients. Number 7, the Chisholm-Ryder self-propelled bean picker. Chisholm-Ryder was another name that loomed large in the mid-century conversation about mechanized specialty crop harvesting. Their self-propelled bean picker, introduced in the 60s, looked even more unconventional than some competitors. Farmers accustomed to typical tractor-pulled units often found themselves staring at what resembled like a rolling fortress of rods, chains, and rotating arms. Looked bizarre. The Chisholm-Ryder design also relied on picking fingers, or rods that gently plucked bean pods from the plant. Where this machine truly stood out, though, was its approach to cleaning and sorting. After the pods got harvested, they moved through multiple conveyor belts and screens designed to filter out stems and unwanted foliage. The operator's cab often sat high above these mechanisms, providing a commanding view of the process, but also giving the harvester a peculiar top-heavy silhouette. By making the unit self-propelled rather than pull-type, Chisholm-Ryder aimed to improve maneuverability. Growers could move from one field to another without hitching and unhitching. For large-scale bean operations, especially in states like Wisconsin and New York, this was a major advantage in saving time and labor costs. The machine's design also spurred competition, leading other manufacturers to refine their own harvesting tech. To outsiders, the Chisholm-Ryder bean picker was borderline alien. It whirred, rattled, and it shook as it combed through the fields, with mechanical arms practically dancing around the bean rows. Yet for all its eccentricities, it still captured the optimism of the era. Agricultural technology was moving at a breakneck pace, and machines like the Chisholm-Ryder picker symbolized the triumph of engineering over one of nature's more finicky crops. Even if neighbors gawked, farmers who invested in these harvesters found that they could meet growing demand for processed beans without hiring an army of seasonal workers. Number 6, the Hesston StakHand. Now, when folks think of harvesters, they often picture combines or pickers that collect grain or fruit. Hey? That's typically baled, not harvested, right? Well, then came along Hesston Corporation of Kansas, flipping that notion upside down in 1967 with the StakHand. This oddball contraption essentially swallowed windrows of hay and formed them into a single large stack, which it then deposited. Picture a boxy structure mounted onto a self-propelled chassis, scooping up hay like a hungry beast before compressing and then spewing it out neatly as a freestanding pile. Well, what's so bizarre about it? Well, for one, the end result wasn't a neat rectangular or round bale. It was a broad stack that looked like a giant loaf of bread plopped in the field. Instead of producing small bales that had to be individually handled, or even the round bales that came into vogue later, the StakHand created a giant mound of hay that often needed a special push wagon or a stack mover to pick up and transport. Now, this system, while efficient for big operations, had to have passerbys just scratch their heads at the surreal sight of these enormous stacks scattered across the prairie. Now, technically speaking, the StakHand did use a set of rotating pickup teeth to gather windrows, then a series of augers or moving floors to propel the material into a compression chamber. Operators could adjust the chamber for moisture content and density, ensuring the hay was packed just right. Farmers looking to reduce manpower found it appealing. One guy could do the entire job of collecting, stacking, and leaving a single massive pile for winter feed storage. Looking back, the Hesston StakHand represented a key milestone in the mechanization of forage handling. Though round balers eventually did take center stage with their simpler transport and storage solutions, the StakHand carved out its niche in the late 1960s and 1970s. In truth, it remains a potent reminder that innovation, sometimes it takes forms that you never expect, like a rolling box that pops out giant haystacks? I guess. Number 5, the Lockwood potato harvester. Now, root vegetables might not stir the same excitement as golden wheat fields maybe, but the Lockwood potato harvester proved that spuds could indeed have a bizarre mechanical champion. Founded in 1930, Lockwood Corporation of Nebraska spent decades refining equipment that was tailored for America's potato growers. By the 1970s, they introduced designs that looked like half mining rig, half conveyor contraption. this harvester could dig into the soil, unearth rows of potatoes, and then carry them up an inclined belt system while letting dirt fall away. Sound normal? Well, here's where it got interesting. Some Lockwood harvesters used a network of vibrating webs and rolling agitators to shake the clumps of loose earth free, leaving the potatoes mostly clean by the time that they reached the sorting table. Imagine that scene: clouds of dust, tumbling potatoes, and metal bars rattling in a frenzy. At first glance, it looked like the machine might fling tubers across the field instead of neatly gathering them, but with careful calibration, it did a remarkable job. One particularly advanced concept was the air cup or airhead system, which utilized suction cups to pick up individual potatoes from a stream of mixed soil and tubers. Then they would just drop it onto a conveyor belt. It was a weird fusion of vacuum technology and old-fashioned harvesting. And yes, that meant a literal vacuum pulling spuds off the bed, drastically cutting down on bruising and missed produce. For potato farmers in states like Idaho and Maine, Lockwood's harvesters were revolutionary, slashing labor costs and improving yields. Some folks marveled at these machines' ability to run all day and night, providing the field wasn't just a mud pit. Others joked that if aliens ever landed, they'd be convinced that these contraptions were powered by unstoppable mechanical moles. In the grand timeline of American farm machinery, Lockwood stands out for turning one of the most humble crops into a showcase of wild engineering. We hope this helps you appreciate that bag of chips next time you're snacking away. Those spuds, they might have taken quite the ride before reaching the factory. Number 4, the Savage Pecan Shaker. The sight of a tree trunk rattling so violently that pecans rain down like hail, that's the Savage Pecan Shaker in action. Founded in Oklahoma, Savage Equipment developed specialized machinery for tree nut operations, and their mechanical shaker became a legendary one among pecan growers across the South. Or is it pecan? Or pecan? I'm not sure. Either way, instead of picking nuts off the ground the old-fashioned way, long poles, tarps, and a whole lot of backache, growers could attach the shaker's hydraulic clamp to a trunk or a major limb, then just flip a switch and watch as thousands of pecans drop into waiting catch frames or tarps in a matter of seconds. So why bizarre? Well, the concept of vigorously shaking a living tree to strip it of its bounty was quite a shock to those who were used to climbing ladders or relying on manual labor. The machine itself looked like part forklift, part robotic arm, and the vibrations that it produced were so intense that onlookers would sometimes wonder if the poor pecan trees would survive. But surprisingly, when used properly, the damage to the trunk was minimal, and the time saved enormous. The real novelty lay in the specialized engineering behind the vibrations. The amplitude, frequency, and duration of the shaking all had to be carefully controlled. Too much force and you'd risk tearing limbs or uprooting the entire tree. Definitely not ideal if you want to harvest next year. Too little and the nuts held fast. Once the pecans were on the ground, farmers could use additional Savage machinery, like a blower, sweeper, or harvest wagon, to gather and clean them. Culturally, the mechanical shaker symbolized the shift toward high-efficiency nut farming in places like Texas, Oklahoma, and Georgia. It was a nod to modernity, proving that even nature's towering obstacles could be harnessed by the right application of American ingenuity. The next time you're cracking open a fresh pecan pie, next time you're eating a fresh pecan pie or pecan pie, you might tip your hat to the Savage brilliance, pun intended, that helped bring these nuts to market. Number 3, the John Deere 6602 Sidehill Combine. John Deere has a storied place in American agriculture, but in 1975, they took a rather curious turn with the 6602 Sidehill Combine. Harvesting on flat ground is one thing. Harvesting on steep slopes where a machine might literally tip over is another challenge altogether. That's where the Sidehill concept came in. The combine's main body could tilt itself to remain nearly level even when the front wheels were climbing or descending on a hillside. Picture a giant green box in the field, its tires angled on a slope, but the top compartment stays magically upright, like a boat on rough seas that never quite capsizes. What made it bizarre? Well, first, the leveling mechanism. Large hydraulic cylinders or linkages would adjust the harvester's angle as sensors detected slope changes. The result was less grain loss as the crop feeding and threshing systems stayed properly aligned. Operators could keep on trucking across rolling farmland without worrying about all that harvested grain sloshing to one side of the cleaning system. It also offered a level of safety, as the design helped stabilize the combine in precarious conditions. For farmers in hilly regions, from Washington state to parts of the Appalachian foothills, this was a godsend. They could work land that earlier generations may have left in hay or pasture because of the risk. Of course, the machine still commanded a higher price tag and required more maintenance with all those extra leveling parts, but the advantage, undeniable. more acres harvested in less time with the better yield. Culturally, the 6602 side hill validated the idea that farmland didn't have to be pancake flat to be productive with modern equipment. It brought a sense of pride to operators who could say, yeah, we tackled those hills head on with specialized American engineering. And in reality, it was one of those machines that made you do a double take. How in the world is that thing not rolling right over? Turns out, it was all by design. Number 2, the Pixall BH100 bean harvester. By the 1980s, mechanized harvesting had branched into just about every type of crop, but snap beans, or green beans, still posed a tricky puzzle. Enter the Pixall BH100, a machine that was so unusual in operation that first-timers often just stood there kind of slack-jawed watching it sort, snip, and collect delicate beans without turning them into mush. Manufactured by Pixall, an American company known for vegetable harvesting solutions, the BH100 turned the typical hand-picking method on its head. Here's how it worked. The harvester's specialized cutter bar could shear the bean plants very close to ground level, feeding everything, stems, leaves, and pods, into a series of vibrating belts and rotating bars. Then came the clever part, a bean stripper that used flexible fingers or brushes to knock beans off the vines. They had to be gentle yet effective. You push too hard, you crush the pods. Too soft, and you leave half the crop behind. If that wasn't bizarre enough, the BH100 typically had an onboard cleaning system with fans and screens to blow out leaves and debris, sending a mostly bean-only stream into a conveyor and then into crates. Technically, the engineering behind balancing throughput with minimal damage was quite advanced. Think of the tangle of stems and pods. It's not like wheat, which stands upright in neat rows. The BH100 had to handle a messy, low-growing plant and extract a tender, slender vegetable. But nonetheless, it managed speeds that made large-scale bean farming economically viable. For producers in states like Washington, New York, and Michigan, where processing plants demanded quick, efficient harvesting, it was a revelation. Culturally, the Pixall BH100 helped shape the modern frozen and canned bean industry, ensuring a consistent supply that hand labor alone struggled to match. And for bean lovers, it meant cheaper, more plentiful produce at the grocery store. So the next time you crack open a can of green beans, you might imagine them once bouncing around a series of brushes in the bowels of a Pixall machine somewhere in Middle America. Talk about a farm-to-table journey. And number 1 is the Gleaner N series rotary combine. Topping our list is a machine that took the standard idea of threshing and flipped it on its axis. Literally. In 1979, Gleaner, then under Alice Chalmers' ownership, introduced the N-Series rotary combine, stepping boldly into a realm where grain was separated by a rotating cylinder and concave arrangement rather than traditional straw walkers. While a few rotary concepts did exist, Gleaner's N-Series was a major American foray into the swirling vortex of axial or rotary technology, creating quite a stir among farmers that were more used to straightforward designs. So what made it bizarre? Well, step inside and you'll see a huge cylindrical rotor spinning at high speed, with grain-laden crop material tumbling through as it was threshed and separated. This design promised higher capacity, cleaner grain samples, and more efficient threshing, but it also came with complexities. Rotors demanded precise rotor-to-concave clearance, careful speed control, and robust cooling to handle the intense friction inside. Early adopters marveled at the speed that this thing could devour a field, but they also had to learn new maintenance routines and fine-tune methods. The cultural impact was equally dramatic. Farmers who had grown up hearing the comforting shoo and walker rumble of conventional combines found themselves facing a contraption that hummed and roared in unfamiliar ways. Some labeled it overkill. Others saw it as the future, praising its ability to handle tough conditions and glean more of the crop from weedy or damp fields. Over time, rotary technology would dominate much of the combine market, proving that the swirling approach to threshing was more than just a weird experiment. In essence, the Gleaner N-Series rotary combine signaled that American engineering was pushing boundaries, exploring new shapes and motions for harvesting staples like corn, soybeans, and wheat. It's a testament to the spirit of progress that keeps agriculture moving forward, even if it means building machines that look and function like nothing farmers had seen before. And that's it for our countdown of 10 bizarre American harvesters you won't believe existed. From contraptions that shake nuts right off the tree to whirling rotors that devour an entire field, these machines showcase the wildest side of American agricultural innovation. They remind us that real progress often starts with some downright strange ideas. And in farming, those ideas can change how we feed the world. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this dive into harvest history, both entertaining and informative. And you enjoyed it, why not stick around? Hit that subscribe button, join the channel, and stay tuned for more fascinating stories from the field.